You were the fire they left in the cold. They saw your warmth, basked in it, smiled under the glow, and still they walked away. You gave them light when they had none, burned yourself down to keep them from freezing, and they never even thanked you. You stood by them when their world collapsed, when others vanished, when silence was louder than screams. You stood, you stayed, you believed, and still, they chose others. You weren't perfect, but you were present. You weren't everything, but you gave everything you had. While they looked for more in empty places, you were right there, offering the one thing this world rarely gives: loyalty without a mask. They didn't see it, or maybe they did and didn't care. Maybe it was easier to chase illusions than sit in the presence of something real. Maybe it was never about who was better. Maybe it was just about who screamed the loudest. And you were quiet. You were still. You were consistent. But that silence, oh, that silence, they mistook it for weakness. They didn't know that quiet people build the loudest storm. They didn't know that stillness isn't surrender. It's strength, coiled, waiting, watching, growing. You were the one they could always count on, until they didn't, until someone flashier came along, someone who laughed louder, played the game better, smiled brighter, someone who told them what they wanted to hear. So they left you standing in the ashes of everything you built with them, like it meant nothing, like you were nothing, and you swallowed it. Every word you never said, every scream you choked down, every question that tore through your skull like broken glass. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Why do people only see me when I'm gone? But deep down, a voice whispered, you were never the problem. You were just too real in a world addicted to fake. They chose others, not because they were better, but because they were easier to manipulate, easier to replace, easier to blame when things went wrong. But you held up a mirror. You reflected truth, and people run from truth because truth demands change. So they ran, and you watched. You watched them laugh without you, smile without you, post about their new day ones, their ride or dies, their real ones. They built new circles, shiny ones, and you stayed quiet. You stayed in the dark. You let them go, even though it tore something raw from your chest, even though it felt like dying. You didn't beg, you didn't chase, and that, right there, is where your power started. Because the moment you stop fighting to stay in someone's life is the moment you start reclaiming your own. You didn't realize it at the time, but your silence was the beginning of something sacred, something brutal, something beautiful. You became the ghost they created, a presence they thought they buried. But now, they feel you everywhere, in the people who don't listen the way you did, in the moments when they need comfort and no one shows up, in the chaos they thought they could escape, but now drowns them. Your absence screams louder than your presence ever did, and that is justice. They miss what you were, not because you're gone, but because now they understand, now they see, now they feel the void. They thought love was replaceable. They thought loyalty had a price tag. They thought you were just another option. But you were the only one who truly saw them, flaws and all, and stayed. And they threw that away. For what? Now they scroll through your silence like it's a language they can't decode. They wonder if you still think about them, if you still care, if maybe, just maybe, they could reach out and fix what they shattered. But they won't. Not really. Because to admit they were wrong would cost them too much pride. And pride is the last thing they cling to when everything else is falling apart. Let them sit in the mess they made. Let them stew in the silence they thought would break you. Because you're not broken, you're becoming. You're shedding skin. You're remembering who the hell you are. They chose others. Let that sink in. Not because you weren't good enough, but because you were too much for a world that celebrates the shallow, too deep for the surface-level games, too honest for people who wear masks, and now they miss what you were. Not because they've changed, but because they finally realized no one else could ever measure up to what they lost. They chose others, and you watched, silent, crushed, but not done. It wasn't just a goodbye. It wasn't a clean break or a peaceful ending. Number. It was a slow unraveling, a quiet war with no flags, no battles, just silence, a silence that carved itself into your bone. One day they were there, smiling, laughing, needing you. The next, gone, like you were nothing but a placeholder, a chapter easily skipped, a face easily forgotten. You felt it before it happened, the shift, the distance. The conversations that once lit up your world began to flicker. Replies took longer. Eyes stopped meeting yours with the same fire. The air grew heavier, colder, filled with things unsaid until their silence screamed louder than their presence ever did. You reached out, once, twice again, and then you stopped, because it's exhausting being the only one holding on. They replaced you, and they did it like it was easy, like you were never part of the foundation, like you were never the one they cried to when the world collapsed. You saw them giving your place to someone else, smiling like they never knew your name, laughing like you were never the reason they learned how to laugh again. You were watching yourself be erased in real time. You told yourself not to care, but the pain was relentless, not loud, but sharp, not sudden, but constant, like glass splinters under your skin, too small to pull out, too painful to ignore. It bled every time you remembered what you gave and how little it meant in the end. You weren't just abandoned, you were betrayed, not by enemies, but by the ones you thought were home. That's the thing about betrayal. It never comes from strangers. It comes from the ones who promised to stay, the ones who called you family, soulmate, best friend, and then chose someone else the moment things got uncomfortable, as if loyalty was conditional, as if love was seasonal. And in the wreckage you stood, alone, surrounded by the ghosts of everything you gave, echoes in empty halls, laughter that once healed, now haunts. You walk through those memories like a graveyard, names etched in your mind, not with love, but with sorrow. You stared at your reflection and didn't recognize the person looking back. Eyes hollow, shoulders heavy, a soul that used to carry others now barely able to carry itself. You looked into a broken mirror and saw all the versions of you they shattered. The soft one, the loyal one, the one who gave too much and asked for too little. You tried to numb it, music, distractions, noise, but nothing could drown out the truth. They left, they chose to leave, they wanted to be somewhere else, and you had to pick up the pieces of a world that was never supposed to fall apart. That's when the villains showed up, not in masks, not in shadows, but inside you. Doubt, maybe you weren't good enough, rejection, they found better. The smiling faces that turned their backs became the nightmare that wouldn't end. Their laughter echoed in your quiet room. Their absence sat beside you at the dinner table. Their indifference followed you like a shadow. You started questioning everything, every word you ever said, every gesture, every look, every moment, as if you were the one who caused the collapse, as if you could have saved it if you were just more. But deep down, a voice kept whispering. They chose others, and you watched, silent, crushed, but not done, not done. Because even in the middle of the shattering, something in you refused to die. Something clung to the edges of your brokenness and whispered, "This is not where it ends." You cried, you screamed into pillows. You stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering how people can unlove so easily. But you didn't break, not completely. You bent, you bled, but you didn't break. And that's what they never understood. They thought leaving you would end you, that by choosing someone else they'd erase you. But you were never just an option. You were the foundation. You were the reason they made it as far as they did. And now they feel the cracks where you used to hold them together. They miss your presence, but they'll never admit it. They miss your kindness, but pretend they don't. They miss the way you showed up when no one else did. And they cover that regret with fake smiles, with forced laughter, with lies they tell themselves. But you see it, you feel it, and still you rise. You rise not because it doesn't hurt, but because pain can't stop you anymore. You've walked through hell. You've carried grief like armor. You've stared down every demon they left in their place. And though your voice trembled, though your knees buckled, you never stayed down. They chose others, and you watched, silent, crushed, but not done. You're still here, and your presence, now sharpened by suffering, is louder than ever. They turned away, but you turned inward, and what you found there wasn't weakness. It was power, raw, relentless, unbreakable, and soon they'll see. The very fire they abandoned is now the blaze they can't escape. Outside you looked calm, stoic, as if nothing had changed. You walked the same roads, sat in the same rooms, breathed the same air. But inside was a war zone, a silent storm, one no one could see, one no one cared to ask about. You carried it behind your eyes like a secret only pain could understand, a thunder that never stopped rumbling, a tornado of unanswered questions, spinning in your chest, tearing through every corner of your soul. Every smile you forced was a lie. Every "I'm fine" was a scream buried under layers of quiet suffering. You woke up in a world that no longer felt familiar. Their absence rewrote the entire map of your life. Places that once brought comfort now felt haunted. Music that once healed now hurt. Words that once meant everything now echoed like betrayal. You became a ghost in your own story, present but unseen, existing but hollowed out. Loneliness wasn't just silent. It was the noise in your head when no one was around, the relentless replaying of moments, of words, of smiles that no longer belonged to you. It was the ache of watching the world move on while you stood still, forgotten, overlooked, invisible, and the voice inside you. It wasn't kind. It questioned everything. Was I ever enough? Was it all in my head? Did I matter? Or was I just convenient? You started second-guessing the very fabric of your worth. Maybe you were too quiet. Maybe you cared too deeply. Maybe you expected too much from people who were never capable of giving anything real. You wore guilt like a second skin, not because you did anything wrong, but because that's what rejection does. It plants seeds of doubt in the most fertile parts of your soul. And still, you showed up, even when no one clapped, even when no one checked in, even when your hands were trembling, your heart was aching, and the weight felt too much. You showed up, not for them, not for validation, but for something deeper, something you didn't even recognize yet. They left, but you remained. And that matters. You remained through the heartbreak, through the silence, through the nights you couldn't sleep, and the days you couldn't breathe. You remained when it would have been easier to run, to shut down, to numb yourself completely. But you didn't. You kept going. And there, right there, is where the storm began to shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It started with a whisper, a flicker, a faint pulse beneath the rubble of your pain. It said, "You're still here. You're still standing. That has to mean something." It was hard to believe at first. After all, what could possibly grow in a heart so ravaged? What strength could exist in a soul so bruised? But strength doesn't come from ease. It is born in resistance, forged in fire, built in the quiet, when no one is watching, when the applause has faded, when the world has turned its back. And you were being rebuilt in the shadows, while they moved on, while they laughed, while they forgot you. You were evolving, while the world saw nothing but your silence. Something ancient, something powerful, something undeniable was rising inside you. You were no longer begging for answers. You were no longer searching their faces for closure. You were no longer hoping they'd come back and fix what they broke, because you realized, they were never the cure. They were the wound. They were the lesson carved into your bone, the fire that burned the old you down so something greater could rise. And even though the storm still raged inside you, it had changed. It was no longer chaos. It was fuel. You weren't angry for no reason anymore. You were angry for every reason. For the time you wasted, the love you gave, the way you dimmed your light so others could feel tall, the way you watered dead plants The way you tried to prove your worth to people who couldn't see it if it screamed in their face. Now you were learning. You were learning to be your own anchor, your own safe space, your own sanctuary, because no one else was coming to save you. And deep down, you were beginning to understand. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe salvation was never meant to come from the outside. Maybe it was always going to rise from within. They left, but you remain. And in that staying, in that surviving, in that quiet choosing of yourself, you became something different. Not broken, not lost, not bitter, but becoming something that no betrayal could touch, something no rejection could erase, something too real to be ignored. The silent storm within you wasn't a curse. It was the awakening of your power. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, not announced with thunder or firework, where you stop running, not because you're ready, not because the pain has disappeared, but because there's nowhere left to run. And in that stillness, you meet yourself. Not the version you showed them, not the one you tried to package neatly so they'd stay, not the people pleaser, the peacekeeper, the soft voice they took for granted. You meet you, raw, unfiltered, bleeding, breathing, burning with everything they never saw. You stand before the mirror. It's cracked, jagged, warped by time and tears. You see fragments, pieces, a shattered mosaic of who you used to be. And at first, you ache, because that reflection, it used to be whole. It used to carry hope in its eyes. Now all you see is what's been taken, what was broken, what was lost. But then something shifts. You lean in, and in between the cracks, you see more, not less. You see the eyes of someone who's been to war, someone who's buried their innocence and survived the funeral, someone who gave everything and was left with nothing and still chose to breathe. You see someone rising from their own ashes, and suddenly, those cracks don't look like flaws anymore. They look like light breaking through. This is your mirror moment, the moment you stop asking, why did they leave? And start asking, who did I become because of it? Because the truth is, you had to become someone else. The old you couldn't survive this chapter. The one who loved without limits, forgave without apology, stayed long after you should have walked away. That version of you had to die, and it did, quietly, slowly, painfully. You buried them with shaking hands and bleeding knuckles. You screamed into pillows. You broke down in bathrooms. You fell to your knees more times than you could count. But every time you rose, even if it was only by inches, you were becoming colder, but clearer, becoming quieter, but stronger, becoming less available, but more dangerous. They called it bitterness. You called it boundaries. They called it attitude. You called it awakening. They called it change. But they never asked what broke you. They never asked what bled beneath your silence. You see, pain didn't just visit you. It moved in, took over, rearranged the furniture in your soul. And while you screamed at it to leave, it taught you more than any love ever did. It taught you how to stand without support, how to speak without apology, how to heal without closure. You learned the difference between people who love you and people who use you because you love so well. You learned that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. That distance is not cruelty, it's protection. That solitude is not loneliness, it's sanctuary. You stopped explaining your worth. You stopped offering proof. You stopped shrinking yourself just to be understood. And maybe, just maybe, that's what terrifies them now. Because they see the fire still burning, but it no longer warms them. They see your strength, but it no longer bends for their comfort. They feel your absence like a shadow that won't leave. Because the void you left was never empty to begin with. They never saw what you were becoming, but you did. You felt the shift in your spine, in your chest, in your soul. You weren't healing to be loved again. You were healing to never need them again. You stopped being the fixer, the forgiver, the one who always went first, who always cared more. You stopped rescuing people who didn't want to be saved because you realized saving yourself was the real revolution. And maybe, just maybe, this is who you were always meant to be. Not the fragile heart they held like glass, but the storm they never prepared for. Not the chapter in someone else's story, but the author of your own. You became your own closure, your own justice, your own redemption. They didn't get to watch this part. They didn't deserve to, because this version of you, the one rising from wreckage, bleeding but unbowed, this version is unwritten history, a force built from fracture, a soul sharpened by solitude. They had you when you were soft. They left before you became sharp. Let them miss what they walked away from. Let them chase the ghosts of who you used to be. Because who you are now, unreachable, unshakable, unforgiving of your own neglect. You no longer chase, you no longer beg, you no longer wait, you create. You build yourself up from everything they tried to tear down. And you do it without fanfare, without vengeance, without needing to prove anything. Your existence is proof enough, so let the mirror crack. Let the edges stay jagged. Let the world see the version of you built from ruin. Because in the end, you're not a broken reflection, you're a masterpiece, reconstructed, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. They thought you disappeared. They thought you faded. They thought you crumbled under the weight they dropped on you. But you were never gone. You were underground. You were becoming. You were sharpening your edge in silence. While they laughed, while they pointed, while they traded your name for someone else's smile. You were working in the shadows, quiet, focused, dangerous, because the most powerful transformations don't happen in the spotlight. They happen in the dark, where no one watches, where no one claps, where no one believes. They saw absence, but it wasn't absence, it was alchemy. It was you tearing yourself apart with your bare hand, only to rebuild piece by agonizing piece into something cleaner, meaner, sharper, smarter. Every long night with no sleep, every workout with fire in your lungs, every journal entry soaked in tears, every ignored message you wanted to answer, every battle with yourself just to not give up. That was the grind. That was the crucible. That was the storm behind your eyes beginning to take shape. No shortcuts, no handouts, no saviors, just you and the decision to rise. And it wasn't glamorous. There were no Instagram posts, no cheering fans, no motivational music, just sweat, blood, rage, solitude. Because when you decide to build in the dark, the silence is the soundtrack, the pain is the mentor, and the absence of applause becomes your proof that you're doing it for you, not for them. And slowly, so slowly, you almost didn't notice, things began to shift. Your steps got heavier, your eyes colder, your voice steadier, your boundaries stronger. You didn't just learn how to say no, you meant it. You stopped explaining your standards. You stopped apologizing for your glow. You stopped watering dead things just to prove you could bloom anywhere. Because you realized this isn't about revenge. This is about evolution. You didn't go quiet to sulk. You went quiet to craft, to forge your name in fire, to rebuild your spine with steel, to take everything they used to break you and repurpose it as fuel. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence meant sacrifice. You sacrificed comfort for discipline. You sacrificed being liked for being respected. You sacrificed distractions, weak connections, half-hearted friendships, and the temporary high of validation for the long, brutal road to your becoming. And now the storm is gathering, not in the sky, not in the streets, but behind your rib cage, a pressure building, a reckoning coming, because you weren't hiding, you were harvesting. Every betrayal became a blueprint, every insult an instruction, every dismissal a declaration. They don't see you yet. Good. Make it impossible not to. You became addicted to growth, obsessed with your own potential, drunk on the silence that used to terrify you. Because now it speaks your language. The blade that was once your tongue now cuts through the noise. The armor that was once your scars now shines like defiance. The spine you grew in isolation now stands taller than their praise ever could have made you. You aren't who they remember. You're who they'll never forget. Because you're not just back, you're reborn. This is the first taste of power, of clarity, of calm intensity. It doesn't scream. It doesn't boast. It walks in quietly and changes everything. Because the real rise isn't loud, it's inevitable. So let them keep thinking you vanished. Let them keep whispering. Let them miss the old you. Because the version that's coming, the one you built with tears, time, and 10,000 silent battles, that version is a force, and it's only just begun to rise. And now, the air begins to shift. They don't say it out loud, not yet, but you feel it, in the way their silence changes tone, in the way their glances linger longer than they should, in the way they speak your name when they think you won't hear it. They see it, not all at once, no. Regret rarely screams. It whispers, it slithers, it haunts, and now it haunts them. The glow you carry? It's different, not just brighter, but untouchable. They see the fire in your eyes again, but it no longer burns for them. They see your stride, steady and sharp, but it no longer moves in their direction. You're not chasing, you're not reaching, you're not available, and that terrifies them. Because you were once the light they never thanked, the warmth they misread, the loyalty they abused. Now you are a ghost of everything they could have had, if only they hadn't thrown it away. They chose others. Now they miss what you were. They traded your loyalty for convenience. They picked temporary over timeless, shiny over sacred. And now they scroll through your feed, linger on old messages, revisit the memory of your presence like a song they didn't realize was their favorite, until the silence grew too loud. They remember the way your voice steadied them, the way your energy calmed storms, the way your love never asked for more than honesty, and yet it was too much for them. They remember, but they don't reach out, not yet, because reaching out would mean admitting they were wrong. So instead they watch, from behind fake smiles, through burner accounts, through mutual friends. They hover like ghosts at the edge of your glow, knocking on a door they once slammed shut. But you don't answer. Because you've learned. You don't open the door to what once locked you out. You don't offer a second entry to those who made you beg just to stay. You gave them gold, and they left for glitter. You gave them truth, and they chose pretty lies. You gave them loyalty, and they traded it for people who offered less, but asked for nothing in return. And now they sit in rooms filled with noise and still feel your silence. Because you weren't just a chapter. You were the entire plot they failed to understand. They chose others. Now they miss what you were. They miss your depth in a world addicted to surface. They miss your fire in a world that only knows smoke. They miss your presence because it was the only place they ever truly felt seen. And what's worse, they know they can't go back. They know the door they once closed with a laugh is now locked with a quiet they can't undo. You're not bitter, you're not cold, you're just done. Done explaining, done hoping, done shrinking for people who couldn't even meet you halfway. You're rising now, and it shows in the way you no longer flinch when they're near, in the way you laugh without watching for their reaction, in the way your joy no longer waits for their permission. You've become a reminder of what they could have had, what they didn't value, what they'll never touch again. They chose others. Now they miss what you were. But what you were, that version is gone. You buried it with the last unanswered message. You buried it with the last tear you let fall. You buried it in silence and watered the soil with growth. And now they're left chasing ghosts. Ghosts of your laughter, ghosts of your loyalty, ghosts of the version of you who would have forgiven them. But you're not haunting the past. You're building the future. And you don't have time to explain to those who threw you away why they no longer have access. They made their choice, and now they miss what you were.